This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure of being joined by Aaman Lamba and Arundell Overman, the translator and editors of the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire, or the Red Dragon, Interlinear Edition. Aaman and Arundell, thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. It's an honor to be speaking with you and Vance. Been a big fan for many years, so really excited about this.
Very excited too. I enjoyed the book very much. A lot of insights, and of course, Aaman, you and I follow each other all over the internet, so we're always exchanging heresies and blasphemies and whatever's going on. So it's always a lot of fun to run into you here and there. Great journey, and it's of course an honor to finally have you on the show. And always an honor to have on the show is the Moondog Vance. How you doing?
I'm okay. Ready for a magical show here. So,
indeed, and yes, we are of course doing this interview in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Who knows how things will be when this show comes out? I don't even want to say the date, but as I say in my introductions, the game is still the same. Through pandemics or no pandemics, we must create magic. We must go inward. We must use our imagination, and everything's going to be all right. So just thought I'd say that. Of course, if anybody wants to give their thoughts on this, please let me know. But first, a little about in the beginning. Aaman, like I said, you and I, you're part of the inner sanctum of Gnosis. We see each other on other channels. I love the stuff you share. You have such a wide scope of your interests and a deep knowledge of all these, whether it's cultural, occult, and so forth. So I guess my question is a short one, is how did you turn into such a heretic?
Well, my journey has followed many paths. I would say I've always loved knowledge. I mean, I truly believe that I was born in this world to kind of discover and share information. I have the moniker Frater Pons Edificator, which fundamentally means brother bridge builder. I see myself as building bridges between people and worlds. And coming from an Indian background, stuff like magic and philosophy isn't actually outside the realm. I mean, there isn't really an outside, so to speak. Everything is a vast continuum that one can kind of fit many worlds into. And so having that, and having had the fortunate opportunity to learn from many wonderful people. I was reading very young and almost continued reading all through. So the vast consumption, and then somewhat of an articulation. I loved all forms of philosophy, and as they go, learning the nature of philosophy, logic, and the other virtues of the intellectual arts, and then translating that to making that a continuum of sharing. Whatever I kind of learn, I like to share it. And so that was where I kind of began. Now it became more formal in terms of pursuing various paths maybe when I was in my teens. I remember getting a copy from somewhere of the Book of Ceremonial Magic, and trying a few things out in there. I remember some wild winds were raised. I'm not sure if it was me or just something wild, but following that, I think I started voraciously kind of connecting the dots, as it were. And if I look at where it's led me, I'd say it's all fitted together in some way, right? This particular book, we'll come to in a bit, and I think Arundell, I'm sure you'll be able to share how we arrived at choosing this book as our collaborative project. But I believe magic or mysticism in general isn't unusual or out of the ordinary. As our friend Gordon White says, the beauty of it is indeed that it's irrational, and
Yes.
That's what gives us value out of this. So I guess many paths leading to many mountains, as it were. So here we are.
Awesome. Well said. And what about you, Arundell? Have you always been a seeker, or how did your journey take you into the more heterodox paths?
Well, about 25 years ago, I met the spirit Asmodee face to face because he came out of a copy of the Goetia that I had bought and ordered in the mail. And I was alone in my house one day, and the book was just there in front of me, and I hadn't had a chance to read it yet. And I saw a cloud of red energy come out of the book, and then I heard a voice that said, "Stand back in the room and I will manifest before you." So I stood back in the room, and the cloud exploded, and there he was. And he was riding on a dragon, and he had three heads. One was a man, and one was a ram, and one was a bull. And he said to me, "Pick up the book." And I picked up the book, and I couldn't take my eyes off of him. And he said, "Open the book." And I opened the book, and I was still just staring at him dumbfoundedly, and I could see every little part of him. I could see his individual teeth in his mouth, and I could see the individual hairs in his head, and the dragon that he was riding on looked me in the eye. And he said, "Open the book." And I opened it, and I was staring at him. He said, "Look down." And I looked down, and it said, "The 32nd spirit is Asmodee, and he has this form. He's got three heads. One's a ram, one's a man, one's a bull, and he's riding on a dragon." And in that moment, I knew that what I was looking at in front of me was what was being described in that book. And I knew that one of the spirits of that book had come out of it and manifested right in front of me. So that changed my life, and it put me on the road of the grimoires permanently. And it took me some time to get into the Grand Grimoire. I thought it was a little bit scarier than the Goetia. I was kind of comfortable with the Goetia at that time, you know. But yeah, so that's why I started getting into all the grimoires, because I wanted to know more about who Asmodee was and why he'd come out of this book, and what all of the others, you know, in that group of spirits were.
Awesome. So you think Asmodeus, do you still know why he chose you, period? Did he want you to just follow a magical path, or what do you think his the thrust of him appearing to you was?
Well, that's a big question, and I wouldn't say that any of us have a full. What's that? What's that?
Yeah, I heard somebody, but then the voice disappeared.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying that that's a big question, and I think it's really beyond a single human's understanding to fully understand what these spirits are and what their motivations are. One of the things that I've found that's really fascinating is that Asmodee comes from the Persian. He's an ancient Zoroastrian demon. And the Zoroastrians borrowed several of the demons in their hierarchy directly from Hindu gods. So these demons didn't just appear out of nowhere. Indra and Rudra are Hindu gods that were taken from Hinduism and put into Zoroastrianism in the top level of their demonic hierarchy. And Asmodee, or Ashmadeva as he was originally called, is in the top 10 demons of Zoroastrianism as well. So it's possible that Asmodee was originally a Hindu god, and that all of those Zoroastrian demons were Hindu gods. As far as the big picture, as far as, you know, what it all means, I couldn't say that I have the full answer to that. I have certain ideas or certain things that Asmodee has told me, but I try to stay real grounded about it, you know.
Yeah, and Arundell, if I might add, coming from maybe a somewhat of a Hindu background, although very early on I was already comparing that with Buddhism and Christianity. In that tradition, there really aren't any demons or really any evil spirits, right? We don't truly worship anything. We utilize these powers as they were. The best example I heard was somebody who said, these are like the individual postmasters at different offices, post offices, and there is indeed a postmaster general, but then there might be other postmasters general who kind of collaborate with this one to get things done, right? So When you talk about the way maybe certain gods have morphed, and we wrote about this, of course, in the introduction into demonic forms, or darker or left-hand path, or whatever one might call them. It's quite interesting, because really where they began and where they've ended up is quite different, right? We were talking about the scary coronavirus. I mean, there are many angels or spirits or even demons. For example, Buer is reputed to give health to the sick, right? And so I mean, it's interesting. One could now, of course, use any energy or anyone's personal intention in any direction, but I think it really depends on how one approaches things, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point you're making, Aaman, because obviously these deities or spirits or cosmic energies, they sort of they evolve, they migrate. In one period they're good, and another one they're demons. So yeah, it's really about a point of perspective. Even the word daemon used to be positive in ancient times with the Gnostics and Socrates, and then that switch. So somebody like Asmodeus is probably going through a lot of reboots.
Right. And yeah, I mean, we are fortunate enough to live in a time where we can kind of delve through these multiple layers. All the fantastic authors, whether it's Stephen Skinner, Jake Stratton-Kent, Gordon White, have shown us, right, that these layers, it's so hard to decouple source from the next stage, and we are really reinterpreting them as we go. So I think it's very it's minimizing their potential if we kind of call them either gods or demons or what have you. Arundell, would you agree?
Well, a lot of these spirits were originally gods, and then over time they became demons. I mean, if you look at Beelzebub, who's one of the main demons in the Grand Grimoire, he is mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible as the god of Ekron. And by the time we reach the New Testament, he is described as the prince of demons. And Astaroth, another one of the spirits in the Grand Grimoire, is mentioned in the Bible as the goddess Astarte. So we can trace a lot of these different demons directly back to old gods. And for me, I worship the demons as old gods, whereas a lot of people take the frame of reference that they want to try to bind these spirits with the names of God and the angels. And I took that perspective myself. I worked the Lesser Key of Solomon in a traditional manner for 20 years, whereas at this point in my life, I've finally come around to, I guess you could say, fully rejecting Christianity and embracing the pagan origins of these spirits.
Interesting. I guess this bears the question, because in the Grand Grimoire, as you guys write, and of course beyond that in the world of magic, these old gods who have become demons or angels, they've been organized in a very strict hierarchy. It's a big bureaucracy. Obviously, as Karen King has written, the idea of in the Western dispensation of heaven and hell being structured, where somebody does this, somebody does that. You can really first find it in the secret book of John with the Gnostics, if it's first or early second century. Then later on with the Christian Neoplatonists, these hierarchies happen. So the question I have for whoever wants to answer it, or both, is when did this sort of a very formal and descriptive hierarchy of this demon here, this demon there, really, when did it come about, or when did it evolve? How did it evolve?
Sure. Arundell, would you like to take that first? I'll add something. Yeah, please.
I would say that it really began in Persia. And if you study Zoroastrianism, you'll find that so many of the attributes that we have for the devil and Satan in Christianity are really borrowed from Ahriman, who was the archdevil of Persian Zoroastrianism. And Ahriman began to be the ruler of the hell, or the underworld, which was a place of darkness, and he was the one that led the other devas, or false gods, or wrong gods, as they call them, to into darkness. And it's amazing how much the model of Christianity was based off of Zoroastrianism, even down to things like waiting for the coming of a Messiah and the seven holy angels around the throne of God. These parallel what they call the Amesha Spentas in Zoroastrianism. So, and you'll see long lists of demons, and those demons paralleled by certain angelic creatures who were thought to control over them. And Zoroastrianism begins about the time of Solomon, about 3,000 years ago. And by the time of 2,000 years ago, where we have the Testament of Solomon, which was probably the most important of the early precursors of what the grimoires, like the Lesser Key of Solomon, the Grand Grimoire, what these books were going to be, was sort of foreshadowed by the Testament of Solomon. And you have a lot of demons like Asmodee and Beelzebub, and then they are countered or frustrated by various angels. And this is really lifted extremely heavily from Zoroastrianism. So I would say that's where it all began, really.
Right. You're absolutely right, Arundell. Although I want to, maybe tie this to even in Zoroastrianism, there was this constant conflict between a kind of monotheism and a strict dualism, and it was a developing concept at that point. Of course, so the monotheistic tendency coexisting with the strong dualism, right? And for that matter, even right then, there was a lot of heterogeneity. And then when it moved into India, there was they really allowed for, I believe about 27 different schools of thought. Now, I personally believe humans by their very nature look for a sense of structure, hierarchy. Maybe it's the archonic model that we all believe is the way the world is or must be or should be. And so therefore we look for those, ontological structures that let us, believe we are able to kind of work with them. And really maybe, as we know in typically in Solomonic magic, the role or the intention of the magician is to elevate themselves to operate at a level at least on par with any spirit they are working with. So, claim authority from the higher levels down, right? So the Agrippa type hierarchies are what are used. Now, that is still, we're still playing a role, as it were, right? If I step back, that role or, treating the spirits again under a particular hierarchy doesn't mean anything, because, no matter how formal we make it, we are just, really perceiving only a very small fraction of the complexity or the vastness of, the powers or the energies we are dealing with. But in general, I think that hierarchy just is almost human nature because we are very comfortable with it. Now, sometimes these hierarchies switch. A very interesting example is in Zoroastrianism, we have Ahriman, who's now considered evil, and Ahura Mazda, who's the high and holy one. But when some of that Zoroastrian tradition switched to India, it actually flipped. So in the Indian tradition, the Asuras are the bad guys, right?
Wow.
And the Devas
So cool.
are the so to speak the gods one worships. And so it's ambiguous, whether these elements are kind of part of some sort of dualistic conception, and the final triumph of good is believed to be what we're aiming for. Or even in, if you take the Grand Grimoire, it stresses very strongly that we are going to leverage the powers of of the god, and in fact 4 gods, and we can talk about that in a bit, to achieve our goals. But at the same time, we are exhorted to stay humble and help the poor. So I think it's a very interesting question as to where does hierarchy come from. But at this point, I think it exists and we have to work within it. But almost every magician I know, from days of old to now, tries to either break those hierarchies or form ways of supplementing them with their own powers.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I know from my perspective, a Gnostic perspective, these hierarchies just suck and I hate them. But they're good to know, these hierarchy of archons, because Gnosis makes you an anarchist, and you're sort of trying to break those down as you're trying to break down the powers of fate, the structures of the heaven, and all that. But Vance, do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know why I've never thought of this before, but do either of you know if we have demons, which are actually, forms of old gods, let's say, are there angels in your system? In other words, are there the other side, or, like Michael or Raphael or equivalents thereof? Speaking of hierarchies, since in a lot of these systems, there's, the good guys and the bad guys. How about angels? Or aeons, or whatever.
Sure. So, and in general, again, now the 27 spirits in the Grand Grimoire are indeed considered demons, but one works with them under the, so to speak, authority of 4 divinities: Adonai, Elohim, Ariel, and Jehovah. And so, you can already see that this is based on a very, Judaic or Catholic tradition. Now, in general, though, I mean, if I just step beyond, say, the Grand Grimoire itself, I think I personally work more probably with angels. Not just the 72, but pretty much anyone who can meet our need. But that being said, again, are any of these 27 angelic powers? Arundell, what would you say?
The question of angels is kind of a tricky one to me, because so many of the demons we can directly trace back to their old god forms, and we can kind of figure out who they are. Whereas with the angels, that's a lot more difficult to do. I have not been able to find anyone who can directly say to me, even there's a single angel that they can trace back to any old god. So as far as myself, I spent the first 20 years of my life commanding the Goetia demons by the Hebrew names of God and by the angels. And I was in the Golden Dawn, so I've performed angelic evocations 1,000 times. But personally, my take on it at this point is that I don't find Christianity to be something that I want to be involved with, because it just feels like that it's controlling, and it's just not a good thing. So I don't mess with angels at all. I respect those people who do, and I still respect, traditional books and all that, but I would be probably closer to what you'd call a Satanist or a demonologist at this point in my life.
Yeah, and maybe you guys can edit this in, but I do believe that, I mean, I agree with Arundell, but, some of these, actually every angel represents again, an energy that maybe is, at least in our interpretive terms, considered positive. Now, I'm uncomfortable with such, nomenclature, and, every spirit or energy has its place and function. I personally have no problem working with anyone, and we do know Michael, for example, was or is believed to be one of the say plague or war gods who got co-opted, and this can be true for some of the others as well. But yeah, I see where Arundell's coming from, that we are, at least at this stage, and I know particularly for the West, the strong messaging that basically we've all inherited from the church influences how we interpret or engage with all these entities, right?
Of course, we have to remember that it was an angel that flew over Egypt and killed all the firstborns and brought the locusts and the plagues and all that. So I'm not sure in the Old Testament you could even say the angels are always good. But I've always wondered that, why the concentration was on demons and not on angels. Kind of the same as Gnosticism, right? Where you've got the Aeons and the Archons, but everybody concentrates on the Archons. But, the Aeons are kind of like amorphous and kind of out of touch and remote for most people.
Like most governments during the crisis right now.
Yes. Right. Well, I think by our very nature, we're all going to be somewhat anarchic or at least, heterodox. And The whole here's what's interesting. If we get what we're looking for, and as they say, angels work only to our better interests. So we might ask for things and not get them. Whereas again, just I dislike such nomenclature, but demons will do whatever we ask of them, and so people who are typically the oppressed or suppressed look for ways out of those constraints, and so which is where they reach out to whatever they can. I actually personally like the concept that you find in Bali, or in Bali Hinduism, which is that there are two forms of worship or belief: Sekala and Niskala, the overt and the covert, or the visible and the invisible. And so from my perspective, as long as we get the outcomes, and they could be tangible or intangible, who cares what we call them or who we work with.
Yes, indeed. And of course, it should be mentioned too. If you really want to go for old gods, forget the angels. Look at the saints for all the days that the church co-opted. You'll probably have better luck finding the gods there. Like, who knows? Saint Corona, isn't that the patron saint of pandemics?
Yes, it's quite interesting how very often, very surprisingly, we find a saint or an entity that precisely matches, the challenge at hand. Almost as if this was what we needed right now. Something I've read occasionally is, if you really need to get things done, maybe reach out for the lesser known or the lesser worshipped entities or saints. I don't know if it was Gordon who said this, or maybe this is a general experience, but so maybe Saint Corona is indeed somebody who we need to kind of engage with in this time of need.
Well, one question that concerns me is that the Bible states in hundreds of places that pagan worship and pagan gods are absolutely false, absolutely disgusting. They are an abomination, and it condemns them in the most strong terms possible in hundreds of places. It says in the New Testament that you can't sit at the table with God and with the demons and the pagan gods. You can't sacrifice to the pagan gods and sacrifice to the Christian gods. So my question is this: is Yahweh truly a jealous God? Or is that something that was written by his followers in a more political situation, because the priests of Yahweh wanted to control all of the tithes of the nation of Israel and that sort of thing? See what I'm saying? Is Yahweh really jealous? Is he truly against goddesses like, for instance, Kali, or a god like Shiva? Are these gods truly abominations, as the Bible calls them? Or is this something that's more of a political opinion of the writers of the Bible? The Bible says that Solomon built a temple to Astarte, and he built a temple to Chemosh. Now, the Bible goes way out of its way to say these are abominations and these gods are disgusting. So my question is, does Yahweh really think these gods are disgusting?
And religion or belief, right? Solomon, was considered one of the most powerful or holy, kings, but at the same time, he worked with, so to speak, the demons. He worshipped Astarte, and all in all scenarios, the priests tend to co-opt the religious beliefs to suit their ends, right? And then there's very little difference beyond a point where the priest becomes the political leader, whether it's from the shaman to the the high priest and so on, and so this is something that will go on. Now, whether Yahweh was a jealous God, well, it's written he was, so therefore we have in effect conferred that ability or power on that particular entity. It's again very hard to determine whether he was or he was believed to be. Arundell?
Well, it would seem that if you were to contact a saint, and that saint during its life hated paganism, that saint is not really going to want to work with you if you're a paganism. I mean, my question is there a dividing line between paganism and between Christianity? Is it really true, as the Bible says, that you can't sit at Yahweh's table and at the pagan table at the same time. You see what I'm getting at? And these angels, do they work for Yahweh? Are they emanations of him or aspects of him? And if so, do they also hate paganism? That's a serious question. If we look in the Bible, there's an account where an angel takes a man to a temple, and he's talking about the god Tammuz, and how that there are women weeping for Tammuz. And he shows this particular prophet the women weeping for Tammuz, and he calls it an abomination. Now, supposedly, this is what comes from the angel's own mouth, which would tell us that angels themselves believe that pagan worship is an abomination. So for me, I have to make a dividing line and say, hey, I'm a pagan. I worship Kali. I worship Asmodee. These are my gods. So because of this, I can't be involved with Yahweh and the angels and these gods, because they are so persistent about saying, paganism is wrong. If you're a pagan, you cannot be a Christian. You can't be both. You got to be one or the other. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That's just what I see from my reading of the Bible itself. And
yeah, I think you're not all wrong. I think a lot of it is politics, but for Yahweh, I would always go to Margaret Barker's excellent book, The Great Angel, and she really reveals Yahweh as this sort of an angel. And it's a multi-dimensional being, very nurturing, also warlike, and just a fascinating, definitely a bit different than you would in the Old Testament. Having said that, a being like Yahweh, I don't know how you would classify it as a god. It wants loyalty from the tribe, and it wants food. In other words, it demands sacrifice, human or animal sacrifice. So I don't know what category you would put somebody like Yahweh, but I don't think a being like that would require its followers to hate other religions, but it does require a tribe, and it does require food.
Right.
Barbecue too.
Yeah, lots of barbecue.
Indeed, lots
sweet
of
savor to the
beyond
Lord.
good. This being is beyond
Yeah.
good and evil. It's an almost alien, and you wouldn't even have to question. You don't try understanding its morality. Let's put it that way.
Right. Well, we shouldn't probably ascribe morality to entities that are not quite human, and B, morality is a very contextual and contemporaneous definition, and so it's always hard to ascribe to historical events. Although we do know what is the good and the gold, right? But if I might just add one facet, we do know the Catholic Church definitely, and in fact most religions, whether it's Hinduism or even Islam, tend to co-opt subaltern or ethnic deities, folk saints, and so on, right? So you have Saint Cyprian becoming very Catholic saint and falling out of favor. You have the very popular Santa Muerte that has now become extremely popular, as my good friend Andrew Chestnut and Dr. Kate Kingsbury do mention. It's probably the fastest
one of the
religion.
fastest growing religions in the world.
Yes. And the same is true in Hinduism, and for that matter in Islam. You will find in India the Virgin Mary is worshipped in many cases as Mariamma, dressed in a sari and put up in a beautiful altar, and it's very hard to distinguish her from a local deity. Right. So that is something that will continue, forever. But as Arundell correctly says, we've got to choose, right, who we engage with or who gives us solace, so to speak. So if Kali is, the one we work with, so be it. Now, there are people, tantrics, for example, who might treat Kali very differently than we might, right? But that doesn't mean that, they're wrong or they're evil or what have you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who have a very different experience than mine. I grew up in what was real similar to Seventh-day Adventist Protestantism, and I know that that's very different than Catholicism. And Catholicism is much more pagan, and even beyond that, people approach deities in a different way. I've got a sorcerer who's a friend of mine in Jamaica, and they use Jesus to curse people to death, which is something that I couldn't even imagine or would be considered the ultimate heresy in my Protestant upbringing. So, I'm just stating that my particular take on things is that I feel like that I have to keep it separate, and since that I consider these beings my gods, I don't mess with angels or Yahweh, but at the same time, I have respect for people that do. I'm not condemning anyone.
Interesting. And something else, we will get to your book very shortly, but I wanted to, and of course, keep talking about the hierarchy above us. But you guys are talking about working with these demons or entities. And I recently listened to a Jungian scholar, and he was talking about people make the mistake in thinking that I am going to access my unconscious and tap into my unconscious. And the Jungian scholar is like, no, that's not how it works. The unconscious taps into you. It's speaking to you. It's telling you what to do. You don't use it like it's some sort of servant or your iPhone or typing in on Google. If you get that shift, you're going to be fine instead of always trying to find the unconscious and struggle with it. Is that how you guys approach working with demons, or what do you mean by working with demons? Is this for enlightenment, spirituality, or just a connection?
You first, Aaman.
Okay. So here's, I've not worked that much directly with demons, although I have engaged with good old Lucifer and Belial and a couple of others. The intent I mostly have is to engage. Again, as a builder of bridges, it's really not so much about what goes across the bridge, but at least to connect the worlds or connect the things. And so that connection, once established, what flows across it will. Now, that is not to say that I do not look for meaning or look for tangible outcomes. I mean, one does want the BMW and the the health and so on. There have been moments where where health was at risk, and we reached out to Belial, for example, the old sin eater, who was very effective in addressing certain health issues. And so I think it's a combination of both knowledge, insight, maybe, so to speak, enlightenment, as well as physical, tangible outcomes.
What about you, Arundell?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, you may have been referring to something that people often call the psychological model of magic, which basically states that these spirits are portions of the human brain.
No. I was just saying, I feel that the unconscious from a Jungian term is the same as the gods or magic or the all. I think, I don't feel that these are, but there is a parallel as above, so below. But I was wondering why do you work with these demons? What is the purpose? Or, you said, yes, Asmodeus appeared to you and this has been your journey. You don't work it for material things, for expansion of consciousness, or anything that might seem on the side?
Well, there is a certain expansion of consciousness, and there's also what they call a raising of the Kundalini when you come into contact with these spirits, because just as they say in India, if you come into contact with a guru, just your aura touching their aura, they have so much power that it causes your aura to shift into different levels or greater expansion just by coming into contact with them. And I've often found that it's that same way with coming into contact with these spirits. Just the edges of our aura touch, it stimulates an electrical current inside your being, which does change your consciousness. I think there's more to it than that. And also, because my initial meeting was something that was almost an accident, in the sense that I had no idea that there was such a creature out there, and it just showed up, it was more like, I don't know, encountering an alien or Bigfoot or something. I had this experience, and then I had to learn how to deal with it.
Very nice. Thank you. And let's get to the book. We've got so much to talk about. Tell us how you guys came to work together on the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire or the Red Dragon.
Well, I think, I'll ask Arundell to share his, perspective. But we were, so to speak, online friends. We interacted quite a bit with, on various Facebook groups and so on. And, I was definitely very appreciative of Arundell's scholarship, practical work, and so on. And I, we kind of decided to start working on this, but I'm going to ask Arundell to share that story on why we felt this was, the thing to do and the right point in time. For me, though, it was really, I've always had a passion for French as a living language. It's surprising it hasn't changed much in 200 years. And having read French in school, unfortunately, I don't get the opportunity to speak it as much as I would like. But it is a language I love, and being able to read it and then translate it was a wonderful opportunity. And so it was a very important book. We were well aware of that. It had been, so to speak, poorly translated by past, translators such as Eliphas Levi, Alphonse Louis Constant. Not that it was badly translated, but stuff was left out of the master translation. And further, there was no proper collection of seals or art, and as Arundell will tell you, we felt that was a big gap in the scholarship of this field. Arundell?
Yeah, I just was looking for an edition of the Grand Grimoire to publish sort of as a cash grab, to make some money, and was looking for various editions. I found what A.E. Waite had translated, and there was some gaps missing, and I was trying to Google translate it, and I just started throwing out little portions of it in French onto my Facebook to see if anybody would help me to translate the portions that were missing. And Aaman jumped in there, and we just kind of started working on it. And as we started working on it, we realized how much fun it was, and just how fascinating the book was overall, And there was also some images that I had been working on for other different things, candle companies, and just it's been a long time goal of mine to get a solid image for each of the demons in the Grand Grimoire, the Lesser Key of Solomon, and the Grimoire Verum. And so, and also Aaman found a work that was pretty much, I think it was a college essay on the Grand Grimoire, and it was in French. And then he passed that to me, and I couldn't read it, but I put it through Google Translate, and I could read enough of it to where it sort of gave me the hints and other things to figure out. And then we kind of passed that back and forth several times and added little bits of knowledge to it, and eventually worked it out into the book we've got today.
Yep. And if I might add, thank you, Arundell. I mean, it's been, great fun, working through this, finding snippets in various editions, and as our kind, forward author, Bal Kedmon, who's a fabulous linguist and, occultist, mentions, he encountered the Grand Grimoire, numerous times in his journey, and it claims to be written by King Solomon, which we know, of course, wasn't the case. But he himself felt there was really absolute dead ends on, the content and, the quality of the text, and, what one might call major blinds. And so, what we've tried to do is bring in as much as we can. I mean, I'm sure there's bits and pieces that we've still not found, but we've tried to bring it together and, make it seamless by putting it in a, what is called interlinear, although to be very precise, it's a parallel corpora, edition, is what we've tried to do is give that ability for, the occultist or the academic to compare and, read through the original text as well as, the translation, right? We know it, as Arundell says, it borrows from other grimoires such as the Key of Solomon, the Ars Notoria. There's a very close correlation with the Key of Solomon and the spirits of the Grimoire Verum. And so bringing this together to what I would say is now the definitive, translation edition is very, very essential. As we've seen, translators play a role in bringing that knowledge to light. And it's almost like when I was doing that, I had to make very very creative decisions as to what something meant, because not everything will literally be translated. I would also actually want Arundell to talk about how we brought in the art for the book. And as you may have noted, maybe we'll talk about this later. Right after it was published, people have already parodying it and writing novels featuring it, which when I found, the original manuscript of a contemporaneous novel called, Le Dragon Rouge, or the Red Dragon, I felt it had to be kind of bundled with this, important grimoire. So, but before we talk about that, Arundell, would you like to talk about how we kind of got the beautiful art together for the book?
Well, yeah, I've been working on getting a solid illustration. The Infernal Dictionary, or the Dictionary Infernal, which was in 1863, was where a lot of these older demon illustrations come from, like Lucifer and Beelzebub and Astaroth. And then basically we just wanted to fill in the blanks. So I got a couple of artists from Finland who are working with me, and they just did a really great job,
They did. It's a beautiful book, well put together. Yeah, the art is striking. Yeah, good job, guys. And I guess for the audience who might not know, what is a grimoire?
Okay, Arundell. Yeah.
Well, the word means grammary, which is from the word grammar, or a grammar book, which roughly translates to instruction manual. And there were at least 1,000 or more grimoires, and they had all sorts of different spells, from how to heal a toothache, or how to appropriate days to plant crops, and they had things like the Hand of Glory, which was a mummified hand of criminals that supposedly allowed you to walk into people's houses and steal things, and they would remain asleep. So yeah, there's lots of different grimoires. Some of the darker ones tended to go into the area of evoking demons, but that's basically what a grimoire is. I like to translate it as instruction manual.
I like that too. And Aaman, you said that there's a difference between the Grand Grimoire and the Red Dragon?
Yeah. So what happened is, the true, or really the older book, is the Grand Grimoire, and grand literally means great in French. So, it was probably a bit of marketing. Now, the book itself is divided into two books, as it were. The first book has, really instructions for summoning, the famous Lucifuge Rofakal, and, what the kind of tools one needs. And then the second part is really something called the Sanctum Regnum. The Red Dragon was really a slightly different edition. Now there's even something called the Black Dragon, and also various other editions, like the hen, a black hen, and a hen that lays golden eggs, and for that matter, you'll often find this book bundled with the book of Saint Cyprian. So we felt, it was very hard, and again, in the syncretic world that we live in, it was really hard to separate out whether we could call it the Red Dragon or the Grand Grimoire. Typically it would be coupled. There were some editions that had the Red Dragon, or the symbol of the devil from the the biblical book of Revelations, with demon horns on the cover, and this dragon holding a shield with so strangely a black hen. But more often than not, the most popular editions were with Lucifuge on the cover, with a kind of his tail curled like a pig, and a French jester's hat, which I do believe might refer to the tarot fool card, which was very popular, at that time in the French category. And so the Red Dragon or the Grand Grimoire, that's almost, one might say, fused or merged into one book.
No, it makes sense. And well, I guess the next question is, who was the author of the Grand Grimoire?
Okay, so it's it's really hard to say. It claims to be written initially or written or based on original work by the biblical King Solomon, although the preface is by Antonio Venecia del Rabbia, which one might translate as Antonio the Venetian rabbi. Now, there are some editions that are claimed to be written by a Dr. Carter, who does appear in some of the witchcraft trial references. But I think, really speaking, it's very hard to say if who the original author was. I'd say it is an anonymous work, as it were. Arundell?
Well, at that time, you couldn't put your name on a book like that because it would take you straight to getting burned at the stake.
Yeah.
So they tended to put Doctor because, as he mentioned, Dr. Carter, that sounds a little bit more reputable, or they would attach Solomon or Cyprian or one of these other names to a book like that. Most likely, each person that got it made slight changes to it, but they were just dealing with works that had been passed down. And you can see how all these grimoires relate. As Aaman said, the Grimoirium Verum is another one that has a very similar hierarchy in the top 9 spirits.
Wonderful. And we should get to the perhaps main character of this book, and Aaman already mentioned him, and that is Lucifuge Rofocale. Who is this guy, Aaman? Or
Yeah, so he's very popular. In fact, he appears even in popular culture, and you'll probably find him in Warlock the movie, and I guess even in Sleepy Hollow you see the Grand Grimoire, and claims it was once owned by John Dee. But our
really?
friend,
I haven't seen that movie in years. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so our friend Lucifuge Rofocale is actually, of course, it's a very clever blind, I might say, right? Lucifuge means one who flees from the light, right? And Rofocale is kind of, you might reverse it and, read this as Lucifer. There are some interpretations. For example, Jake Stratton-Kent also has called out that this Mephistopheles can also be translated as, one who flees from the light. But Lucifuge is Lux Fugio, fleeing from the light, and Lucifer, if you just reverse that, Rofocale. And so we did find a reference in the 11th century, Michael Sellers, in the hierarchy of demons in Iamblichus and the Neoplatonist. And so the 6th variety of demon, the one who kind of is the lowest level, as it were, which are barely sentient beings, are the Lucifuges. And he termed them eminently malicious and mischievous, that don't merely impair men's intellects by fantasies and illusions, but destroy them. And so they were definitely considered very low creatures. Now, if you read the actual grimoire, it often flips between referring to Lucifer and Lucifuge, and very often it says, well, if you can't get Lucifer, at least get one of his subordinates, in this case Beelzebub or Ashtaroth. Lucifuge Rofocale, though, is the, so to speak, the prime minister of the hierarchy. So if you look at the hierarchy here, we are talking about Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Ashtaroth, LBA, with 6 lower demons. Lucifuge Rofocale is the prime minister. My good friend Satanakia, the commander-in-chief. The reason I call him my good friend is when I was researching these demons, I found 1922 French newspaper where French senator who made a kind of a deal with the German Reich was compared to Satanakia, so he was definitely well known by them. Yeah, and then we have Agliarept, who's kind of the commandant, Florati, the lieutenant general, Sargatanas, brigadier major. I'm sorry, I think the guy who made the deal was Sargatanas, not Satanakia. And then we have Nebiros, who's the aide de camp or the inspector general. So as you can see, they try to give these people martial titles or emperor, prince, and grand duke. But fundamentally, Lucifuge is the, so to speak, the prime minister of this infernal hierarchy.
But he's not at the top. He's not way at the top.
He's not. Lucifer is still the big guy. Yeah.
Lucifer is, and Lucifer is interchangeable with Satan in this dispensation.
Well, Satan isn't mentioned really by name. There is a Satanakia, which one might say is the is closest, but really I think Satan is something that came later, or not later, but is a different stream of demonology. Arundell, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'd like to touch again on what you said about the Lucifuges in the 11th century. Did you say that was a class of spirits rather than an individual spirit?
Yes. So there were the aqueous, the marine, the aerial, the earthly, the subterranean, and then the Lucifuges.
Okay, that's interesting. I had heard someone say before that the Fly the Light reference referred to spirits that dwelt in caves, and that they were associated with wealth, and that was another one of the reasons why Lucifuge was associated with wealth. He's the one that you make a pact with to show you where the treasure's at. Other than that, I haven't been able to find a reference for the name Lucifuge Rofakel as a distinct spirit earlier than the Grand Grimoire, which the earliest edition of that is 1750. There is, as we mentioned earlier, in the Grimoire Verum, the top 9 hierarchy matches almost identically, except for a spirit named Tarchimaki, which is in the Grimoire Verum, which holds the same place in that hierarchy as Lucifuge does. So it's possible that Lucifuge was based off of, or another name for, Tarchimaki. And the Grimoire Verum itself is dated to 1517, and it's possible that it really is that old. So the spirit may go back that far.
Very cool. And it should be mentioned, the grimoire, the Grand Grimoire, is not just making contact with Lucifuge and getting something out of it, but aren't there other spells at the end? I believe there's a love spell, a necromancy spell, and so forth. Asking for a friend. Yeah.
Don't forget the lottery.
Yeah, the lottery. I need that one.
Right. Oh, yeah. There's a lottery spell. But yeah. So here's, part of this was again marketing. Spells are ultimately one of the most popular things about magic, right? Whether it's witchcraft or folk magic or more formal ceremonial magic, one tries to get things, that are profitable. Now, some of the spells in the Grand Grimoire are particularly rather gory. They involve skinning of a cat or boiling a wolf and so on. But there are also love spells. Now, I particularly do like the love spell because, again, in most translations, it was very poorly translated. Here, there's a name you as Sheva, Sheva. This is actually Solomon's true love, the Queen of Sheba, and so it's quite surprising that nobody really connected the two. And there is a herb mentioned in the spell called the Herb of 9 Shirts that I was able to identify as something quite familiar as the Alpine leek or the Victory onion, which actually grows in France, in that region, and it was considered to be a safeguard against the attacks of impure spirits. So I guess in this case you're trying to be protected as well as finding the person you love. There are other unusual spells that involve making someone you like to dance naked. And very common unusual ingredient, I should say, included human fat and natural mummy. Now, natural mummy were really ground up Egyptian mummies. They were a popular medicine in Europe at the time. Pliny the Elder wrote that its ingredient had healing properties, so there is a spell that uses mummy and human fat along with deer oil, laurel oil, wine, and what's called vervain, which is really verbena leaves, to prepare a plaster that would make you go like the wind. There are some ink spells which are fortunately quite easy to make. Just some herbs with gal nuts, copper sulfate, rock alum, gum arabic, to make you write the pacts that are kind of central to the book. But if I might come back to the pacts, this grimoire is often or unfortunately considered very evil. But in reality, if you do a close reading, as I hope the readers will do, it actually is about being wise and prudent. The book actually closes with the very heartfelt note to the reader to be wise and prudent, like the great Solomon. Advising you to be able to enjoy the wealth you might generate, but also to be humane to your fellow men, comfort the unfortunate, and live content. So I think it isn't as horrific as one might think. And this concept of making paths was, again, I think, another way of finding a way to be to break the hierarchy, as it were. Most people at this point were very poor. This was, of course, very evidently a grimoire written for the educated class. It contains Latin prayers. It contains, references to certain items that you would definitely need to be well off and well educated to be able to leverage these spells, or even carry out these operations. So I would take the positive perspective. But yes, these spells are pretty interesting. There are many editions, and in fact, again, in some editions it gets combined with the Book of Saint Cyprian, and then a whole lot of other spells come in. But before I talk about the necromancy bit, Arundell, anything you'd like to add about the unusual nature of these spells and so on?
No, you covered it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Coming to the necromancy, now I think, as Miguel, as you would probably be well aware, necromancy has been very popular, from days old, right? I mean, in a way,
Right.
every spirit act is, in a way, considered to be conversing with the dead. Even the Goetia are probably conversing with the mighty dead, as it were. And you have in the Odyssey, Odysseus makes this particular journey to the halls of Hades, and he makes a trench and pours a libation to the dead, and talks with them, and gets his gets, so to speak, his Google Maps of the day. But in the Grand Grimoire, the necromantic rite is actually very simple, and it actually clearly demonstrates that this was part of the Catholic tradition. It really, all it involves is attending the midnight mass at a Catholic church. And as I understand, someone was telling me that's part of the reason they moved and the midnight mass back to 10 p.m. But really, when the priest raises the Holy Host, the sorcerer, intones under his breath, "Arise, ye dead, and come to me." So he is, in effect, drawing from the psychic or holy energy of the priest to quickly draw that energy to himself, leave the church, and go to the nearby cemetery, where he really asks the infernal powers to release the dead and talk to them, and scatter some usual graveyard dirt, and have some conversation with the dead. So it's a rather simple rite. Doesn't involve a lot of materials, but it is interesting that it was included in some editions.
Very cool, and thanks for clearing that up. And Vince, do you have a question for Aaman and Arundell?
Yeah. Do you guys, either of you guys, practice the spells from the Grand Grimoire? Are they part of your daily life? Like, what do you use it for? Do you guys make yourselves invisible? Or that was one of the spells, right? Anybody winning lottery? I mean, I know I'm asking in humor, but I'm serious. I mean, does this work? And the important thing, is there a price when you make a deal with the devil, with a demon, or whatever? What do they expect in return? Because I don't think they're doing this for nothing, right?
Let me take the second part, because really, again, this collection of spells, now I haven't worked with most of these, although I have tried to make some of that ink with the limited ability that I had with the features. But here's the interesting thing about the pack. Now, it does look like, when you first read the grimoire or the initial pact, it appears that, really, when the spirit first appears, he does ask for your soul, as it were, right? But the grimoire actually cautions the operator not to surrender one's soul. In fact, it says, you should, warn the spirit that you come under the authority of, the higher deities. You are armed with what's called the blasting rod, or the incredible power of the rod that casts the angels down into the abyss. And so you refuse to make a deal, and what you finally agree to in terms of a pact is to grant or to give the spirit a silver or a gold coin once a month, and actually to perform an act of charity every month for the rest of your life. And if you fail to do this, in effect, if you forget to do this, the spirit can take your soul, as it were. So
Oh boy.
again, I think it's I dare say people were a bit carried away with this concept of giving up on soul. There is a famous pact of Urbain Grandier, which is preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale, and part of Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, and many other books, where supposedly a priest in a French convent made a deal with the devil, and it was later proved that there was no such deal with the devil, and most of that was forged to, so to speak, get the property, or malign the good priest. But in this case, the pact is nothing but giving charity, or granting a coin out of the wealth that the spirit provides you to the spirit, or really to the poor.
That doesn't sound too much. Yeah, so it doesn't sound too much different than the Catholic Church. You got to put the coins in the envelope, and if you gotta do charity, if you don't, your soul's going to hell, right?
It is. I would dare say this comes from the same tradition. But Arundell, what are your thoughts on the pact, and have you made a pact, so to speak, with the demons?
Well, there was two questions. I'd like to address them both real quickly here. Concerning the pact, I see that more as just an exchange of things in return for service. I mean, since I see these demons as old gods, it's just a matter of offering them things in return for service, such as generally incense or candles or flowers or small gifts. I don't sacrifice chickens or anything like that personally, but I think it's just an exchange. And if you do receive something from spirits that is really life-changing, and then you just kind of ignore them, they don't appreciate that. But I don't know that it's necessarily so much as they get your soul in the Christian sense. I don't see it that way. As far as the spells go, I have not done very many of the ones in the Grand Grimoire. I have carried out one of the spells in the Grimoire in Verum for love, and that definitely worked in ridiculous ways. But I would like to speak about a spell that I did carry out in the Golden Dawn system, and that is invisibility. And invisibility is one of those things that you hear a lot of talk about, but nobody really wants to talk about it as far as they've actually tried it or had any results about it, because most people, they just think, oh, that's impossible. I'm never even going to try that. And in the Golden Dawn, they have a ritual where you are forming a shroud of darkness made out of the energy of the Kabbalistic sphere of Binah. And that shroud is fortified with a lot of different Egyptian gods and certain angels. And when that shroud forms about you, it actually can make you invisible. And I went fully invisible in front of my ex-wife, and it scared her really bad because she was standing right next to me and walking around in the room with me, and I was fully invisible to her senses for over 20 seconds. And this was caused through the aid of spirits. And of course, I had been in the Golden Dawn for 15 years and done over 1,000 rituals. So I definitely put in my time with that ritual, and I had done it a tremendous amount of time. It takes an hour to perform that ritual in its Golden Dawn manner. But what it does is it concentrates the rays of your aura, your energy body, within a very close sphere that is next to your body. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, if you extend your arms out to your sides to the length of your arms, that's the distance of what they call your sphere of sensation, or the egg of your aura. Now, what most people don't realize is that this egg puts out little fibers or threads that connect to all of the people around us all of the time. So if someone walks in a room with you, those threads connect first. And if those threads or fibers of your energy body are withdrawn inside this astral cloak, then people don't notice you first with their astral bodies, and so they don't look with their physical eyes. And that's how invisibility is actually accomplished, because you're withdrawing those rays inside of you, and so people don't feel you, and so they don't look for you. Does that make sense?
Makes
Yes.
perfect sense.
Yeah, my wife does that by naturally. I'm not kidding. She's a very shy person and so forth. And there are times when she's like in the middle, nobody sees her. Oh, I didn't see you there. So
Yeah, people can do that naturally if they actually withdraw their rays tight enough, But that shield or that shroud in the Golden Dawn teachings, it does that. It wraps it around you. It takes a lot of work. I actually accomplished it once in an extremely spectacular manner, and then 2 or 3 other times in minor manners. Like I was concentrating on it, and someone walked in the room and looked around, and they couldn't see me. And, oh, there you are. They spotted you after a second. And it kind of made them jump. Like, how'd you get there? But it is a real thing. So those spells can produce effects. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, it works with waitresses in certain restaurants too. You're sitting there forever and they can't see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a good spell to have during the Me Too movement either, I would say. Get in a lot of trouble.
Arundell did remind me of one thing, that a lot of the spells you see in this book, and even this, in fact, all these operations, this very much comes from, so to speak, the masculine tradition of magic. In fact, I'd say most ceremonial and ceremonic magic tends to shift in that direction. Now, the most powerful or the most interesting spells, as it were, come from what is, again, a term I dislike, come from the witchcraft tradition, or the the folk tradition, as it were, and that's where knowledge was passed down. Maybe some of it was sympathetic, maybe some of it was botanic or chemical, but that's where one sees the more popular spells, as it were, or the more wide collections of spells, and I'd say that's, at least to me, more interesting.
Indeed. And backing up a little bit, I was looking at my notes. You were talking about necromancy and magic, but you guys quote Scottish mathematician John Napier, who says that 22 popes practice necromancy.
Yes. In fact, and again, this goes back to the question of, is it really magic if a pope practices it, right?
If the bear shits in the woods,
right.
Practices magic in the woods.
Right. No, but it is recorded that certain popes, Alexander the Sixth, Gregory the Seventh, Boniface the Eighth, were believed to have kind of worked with Satan to satisfy their lust for power. Now, in general, though, I think we do know the church did try to ban the practice of any kind of magic outside its realm, and led to the horrors of the Inquisition, which, again, although it drove the practice underground, it very much continued. We do have 1 or 2 grimoires that are claimed to be written by popes, the grimoire of Pope Honorius, which most likely was not, and research has shown it had very little to do with that particular pope. But yes, again, this is maybe in part it was trying to get credit that if the popes are doing it, it can't be that bad, but it was very much a part of the tradition back then. Most people who were educated, who could read, were from the church, or were priests, and so it's natural that they would experiment or try things out, although it was very much a forbidden so to speak science at the time.
I guess that begs the question too. There's the old saying that says, they practice magic, we practice religion. Or as they say, magic is spirituality for the individual and religion is magic for the collective. So how did they divide the line. And of course, I mean, when you read the Roman Empire at times would make any sort of magic illegal, which basically mean it had to be state sanctioned and licensed before you could do it.
Right. And I think that continues even today. Now, the real shift, of course, happened with the printing press, right? Much like religion was controlled, people weren't allowed to read the holy books, whether it was in Christianity or even in Hinduism. And for that matter, the Buddha's innovation of putting his text, as it were, in the language of the common people in Pali led to, more understanding of more people relating to it. The same is true in magic, right? When magic was a higher, so to speak, a state sponsored religion or limited to, a few people who could perform those, rituals on behalf of others, it was really similar to how priests performed, prayers or various rites for their folk, right? But when it went, so to speak, public, it was harder to control. And that we do know the archons, they do hate that, right? The ability of people to perform do things on their own. And I think if you look at the modern age, Arundell and I are part of so many groups. There are hundreds of thousands of people, I dare say, performing these operations in various forms. Now, again, it's hard. I'm almost certain they don't follow the true Solomonic or even any of the hardcore grimoire traditions. At the end of the day, all we are is very, very small people who all, can just aspire to, greatness. But it has the line, I'd say, is very blurred in the modern age. Back then, it was definitely far more rigid. And I think the distinction of magic versus religion, and for that matter, witchcraft was such a forbidden term. I mean, so many people died for just having a little more scientific knowledge than the other person, or being more empathetic and helping maybe with childbirth or teaching people how to make ends meet with limited resources. So it's quite unfortunate. I think religion has a lot to answer in that sense.
I would certainly agree. And it shall continue. Even today, you've got some of these pastors healing the coronavirus through their TV screen, like Jim Baker. But that's religion. They're not practicing magic. They're not summoning some power. Well, they're getting very rich off of it. So maybe that's the difference. But and a question for you, Aaman. Through, you just mentioned the archons. Are you able to reconcile the Gnostic worldview of us being basically trapped in a prison with this magic worldview with Hinduism and other religions? Or how do you see the Gnostic mythology working for you in your life?
That's an interesting question. If I had to describe myself today, and of course I might change my mind tomorrow, is I'd call myself a Gnostic polytheist, right? I believe there are many mountains, we have to climb, and each of them has its value. Now, I do recognize that the traditional Gnosticism of us being in a prison is the way most people interpret Gnosticism, and I dare say I would agree with that. No matter what we do, we are still within the boundaries of other people's controls. Now, magic gives me, or gives anyone who tries to attempt to perform it, an ability to break through those bars, right, or at least see through them, as it were. Now, the other way to look at it is, when I recognize there are bars, I'm already outside them in one sense, because are the bars holding me from the rest of the world, or is the rest of the world on the other side of the bars? So have I kind of flipped that concept on its head? And again, this form of magic is one form that allows you to kind of step out of the quotidian and kind of see beyond. In the Gnostic sense, I was just reading today, in the secret revelation of John, that Eve was brought into this world to kind of teach Adam, as it were, the how to engage or how to reach the glories of the the ineffable spirit. And that in effect tells me that is a form of magic that she taught us, and that does appear in the Book of Enoch as well, where the powerful creatures teach the women certain forms of magic. They teach them botany, astrology, and so on. So I think these are different streams that have kind of run in parallel. The more formal methods, such as we see in the Grand Grimoire, are so to speak, actually not Gnostic. They're probably more archonic, if I might put it that way. But once again, we can use even the tools of the archons against them, or probably we must use it to kind of get where we want to go. So that's how I see this. I'm going to use any tool, as Gordon does say. We're all on a salvage mission, and so
Yeah.
I'm not going to. I would love to rescue the archons, and now that's another thing I see a convergence between the Gnosticism and Buddhism, where Buddhism does have the concept of the bodhisattvas of the earth. These are people who've realized they are enlightened or have been enlightened, but have chosen to stay back to kind of help the others along the path. Now, that's a very challenging, oath to take. I mean, I personally would not want to, stay on that path for too long. I mean,
I'm out of here.
I think both me and my wonderful wife Deepthi have this intention of kind of stepping off the path, the chain, the wheel, as it were. But magic is probably the shortest way, or the quickest way of getting off that straight and narrow path.
Yes. And what about you, Arundell? Do you see the world as having evil spirits, or what is your view from a more cosmic perspective?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. I'm not real familiar with Gnosticism, but I don't know that I would compare the demons of the grimoires with what they call the archons. I would be more likely to compare those evil spirits with something in the framework of Carlos Castaneda, and how he talked about how there was what they called flyers or mud shadows, which is a race of beings that feed on the energy of human beings. And I do think there are lower level spirits or evil spirits, but I wouldn't necessarily associate those with grimoire demons. And I also don't have a tendency to think that the flesh or the material world is a bad thing. As I mentioned, I'm a little bit closer to what you might call a Satanist, and we glory in the flesh and in sex and in the pleasures of the flesh, as long as those don't tend to compulsion and alcoholism and drug addiction and things like that. There's a definite line between enjoying the pleasures of the flesh and compulsion, being bound by them and beaten by them. So, I enjoy the world, and I hope to incarnate back here over and over because I love it. I love having the material body and feeling the wind on my skin and the sunshine and just all the beautiful things that are here on this planet, along with the ugly,
Well said. Yeah, beautifully said. And do you guys ever get into a system, not a system, but you're going along and you're like, okay, I think I've got this system of how the universe is and my spirituality. And you go, oh, fuck, now I got to make space for extraterrestrials, or, oh my God, time travelers, or some conspiracy. And it just sort of takes you off your game.
Oh, I like it all. I mean, everything from Bigfoot to aliens, anything that's related to magic at all. I find some things are more practical and will produce results a lot better. I spent a lot of time in the Golden Dawn, and I found that a lot of Golden Dawn students spent so much time trying to figure out the numerical correspondences of words, and they call it gematria. And my God, it just seemed like such a waste of time in comparison to more direct tools such as directly invoking spirits, or also I'm really big into yoga and breath control. Breath control will produce sensations inside your brain that make you feel like you are on psychedelic drugs or out of body experiences, incredibly powerful things are in yoga that are really simple tools. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, great answer. What
Yeah.
about you, Aaman?
I'd say I follow every path I can uncover, and I do see the connections between them. The whole alien hypothesis, whether it's physical or consciousness based, it fits into this realm. And some very often I've even read descriptions of the magic circles that one uses in certain forms of magic as creating a kind of three-dimensional flying saucer kind of structure that transports one into another plane. And there are many cases of people who've done these forms of magic, who've kind of opened those doors, as it were, and had engagement. We do know, of excellent work by everyone from Dean Radin to Peter Lavenda to the Megonian, so to speak, myths, if I might call it that. In this, in the book itself, in the Grand Grimoire edition, you've probably noted that I have this wonderful, the novel at the end, which most people unfortunately seem to not read, but I'm very passionate about because it has so much depth in it. Now, in that, there is a collection of, so to speak, alternate histories and fantasies, and the history of the fairy Melusine, for example, who we probably recognize in the Starbucks, siren. Our good friend Christopher Knowles would be very glad to recognize that. But Melusine was, so to speak, a historical figure, dating back to 1387, around Charles V. She is supposed to have created the fortress of Lucinia, which was in the region of Poitou, and she was half serpent, half human, and from, so to speak, the fairy kingdom. So again, if once you start expanding your so to speak awareness of these things, initially these seem like very distinct concepts, but as you study them further, you start seeing that they're actually maybe different perspectives on something common. The grand global mythos, as it were, representing itself, or maybe different entities being interpreted in different ways at different points in time. So I would say I do like to follow those different paths, or and just like one person's religion is another person's magic act, so is one person's conspiracy another person's kind of gospel.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
that's definitely there. Mm-hmm.
Vince, the last question as we get to the end of the show.
Yeah, I'm on Arundell. Do you think that politicians are making use of magic, black, white, any color? I mean, you hear all this stuff about spirit cooking and weird stories about sacrifices, human and animal and so forth. What do you think? You think they're using that to win elections?
I will say this: the world is bigger than any of us can fully grasp, and there's just so much going on that none of us can really fully know. Are there reptilians in high places or whatever? I would have a tendency to think probably most of that is conspiracy theories. I think politicians use a different type of magic, which is more related to psychology and things like that, and how they speak and how they gesture, which is a magic in itself. They say Adolf Hitler had a guy that trained him in how to make gestures, in how he would hold his body and how he would speak, and those things were extremely powerful. Emotion is magic. Being able to whip up a crowd is magic, but I don't think it's necessarily standing in a circle with a wand or doing things that we would consider magic. I have a tendency to think most of that stuff, like spirit cooking and stuff, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, I do believe everyone tries things out, so they're probably dilettantes. I remember George Washington did say once that you should treat government like stage magicians, know that
Well
they're
said.
performing actions, and you want them to follow that. Now, is it is something that, say, Santeria worshipper does very different from Donald Rumsfeld describing to us on television why it was okay to show the bloody, shaved corpses of Saddam's, sons. Now, isn't that a form of, kind of negative,
Yeah.
magic? Or for that matter, in most regions in the East, there would never be a single, political act or an inauguration without verifying, the dates and the astrological situation, as well as, carrying out certain religious rituals. And so, this concept of, that it's proper to be scientific. Now, we must be scientific. We are. I mean, it goes without saying, but that does not mean that one does not allow for the possibility of other ways of doing things. And I do agree, Vance, that politicians, intentionally or not, do rely on either psychological or maybe more covert forms of magic, in so to speak, applying their will on the people.
All right, thanks.
I like that.
Yeah, well said. Well, we are at the end of this very fascinating interview. And before we go, do you guys have a website, or where can they find this book, The Grand Grimoire or The Red Dragon, your illustrated and interlinear
Sure.
edition?
Thank
Just
you.
Amazon?
And absolutely. There are two editions, and I want to, acknowledge that we published it in two editions. One is called the Illustrated Grand Grimoire, and that is with all the wonderful art and the text in English, so practitioners can directly use that. There is a second edition, which is the Complete Illustrated Grand Grimoire, which has the interlinear text as well as the novel. Both are indeed on Amazon, and I think you can search for Arundell's name or my own. As for myself, I do not have a website. I mean, I've had them in the past, but I think I hang my hat wherever it kind of fits nowadays. So I can be found on Twitter as Aaman Lamba. And as more books come out, I'm currently working on about 4 books at once. Wonderful, maybe 40-volume collection of fairy tales with my amazing artist, magic girl wife, Deepthi Lamba, as well as a collection of poetry, a collection of magical workings for solitary magicians, and a few other, interesting efforts. But so I'm pretty much all over the map in these interesting times. Arundell?
Yeah, you can find us on Amazon. I'm working on another version right now of the Lesser Key of Solomon, which will be fully illustrated and similar to the edition of the Grand that we've put out. And Aaman and I have kind of tossed the idea around of getting deep into the Grimoire of Honorius, which is one of those grimoires that was supposedly written by a pope. We've looked at it, but haven't started on the project yet. But that's something that I hope we can get a chance to do in the future. I think it'd be really a phenomenal edition of that book as well.
Yeah, but Arundell, you've got those other wonderful books as well, right? With werewolves and.
Oh yeah, I've got almost 20 books, either in print or in the process of coming out.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, glad you guys are putting out this work. I think it's important work. And these days where people need more choices and more answers out there in the spiritual world and certainly the inner world. So at the end, Vance, thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, I learned a lot, and nice to hang out with you both here, both Aaman and Overman.
Arundell.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful. It's been so good. Thank you.